Put it in the chat and let us know. And also put in the chat. Thank you so much. Thank you for confirming. NYC, hello. San Diego. Oh, I love San Diego.
I miss New York.
Bay Area. Yes, Scotland.
Ooh, Scotland. I haven't been there since I was like 4.
Warsaw. Whoa.
Oh, Warsaw. I haven't been there in like 16 years.
Wow.
That's amazing.
From Texas. Oh, how's the weather in Texas right now? Hello, Henry's transcriber. It's great. Winter just
Awesome.
ended. That's great.
Okay, I think we have critical mass, and I resolved my technical issue. So, oh, Gilad, thank you. I miss you as well, in particular. One of my closest friends is here. Awesome. Okay, why don't we kick off, Nancy?
Yeah. Welcome, everyone. This is the product strategy session hosted by yours truly, Nancy and Rachel. We're here
Hello.
to talk about the things that you don't really get officially taught as product managers. So, super excited to have today's discussion. Oh, I see that we have agenda presented on the slide. I didn't realize that. Okay, so as you can see, we have a lot prepped for you today, and then we'll also have some time at the end for Q&A.
Awesome. So we're going to cover why strategy is the gap, 4 important questions that go at the core of it, what good strategy looks like. We can't do a deck in 2026 without talking about AI, so we put something about that as well. And what to do starting Monday, since today's Friday, and hopefully after this, you get to chill. So I want to start with a little icebreaker for strategy. So what I would want to hear is, folks, what are your names? Where are you from? And do you prefer chess or poker? Nancy, we can take care of that for you. Awesome. I'll give my spiel for poker in a second, and I think it does relate to strategy. Chess is a game of perfect information. If you play against somebody who isn't as skilled as you are, you're probably 90% of the time are going to win. Poker is a lot more like life. You can make all the right decisions and still lose. You can make wrong decisions and still win. But it is actually a game of decision making. And it's not a game of bluffing as much as it is a game of perception and observing tendencies, understanding odds, and understanding psychology. So if anybody ever wants to talk to me about poker, they can clear up a few hours because I can talk about it nonstop. Okay. Um, Nancy, why don't you introduce yourself?
Yes, hello everyone. My name is Nancy Chu. I see some familiar names in the chat. It's so good to see you again. And also see tons of new names. I was super happy to meet you here. And thank you so much for coming. My work is on supporting senior leaders, L7 through L9 at the top tech companies. And a lot of what I do is at the intersection of strategic thinking and then communication, which then get applied in product sense and leadership development and product strategy. And that can result in very tangible ways like total compensation my clients were able to land. So, for example, Meta at 1.1 million, Microsoft at 1.2, Stripe at 1.4, and very recently 1.6 at a FANG adjacent company. It's so recent, so I don't feel comfortable leaving the exposing the name just yet. But really glad to be here to share my perspective with you guys and also with Rachel.
Awesome. Nancy is also a great friend and mentor. So I'm excited to do this with you. Okay, so I'm Rachel, and I also see some familiar names in the chat, and thank you so much for joining us today. I'm an executive coach, and I have a bunch of experience as a product manager, and I actually started my career as an engineer. A lot of my work in product specialized in solving recommendation problems and using AI systems before they were even the way they are today in order to translate that into outcomes. But then what I realized is that my passion is in helping people cut through their noise, grow in their careers, and really build high-performing teams that grow along with them. Some of the outcomes that I've had is I've had a Google product manager in the AI field landing just under 1 million. I had somebody in the product org for OpenAI. They have different titles, but they are at 800K for deployment at 11 labs. And one of my dearest clients who went from a job hunter to an IC to a director in under 12 months. And really, what I like to focus on with people is their thinking and their confidence, not on frameworks that they can repeat, though repeat and rehearse, I mean, but more thinking and trusting in their thinking process. Okay, so with that, I'm going to hand it over to Nancy to talk to us about why strategy is the gap.
Yes, next slide, please. So I am curious. Put it in the chat and let me know if this resonates. You shipped something on time, something really cool, something very innovative. You hit your metrics and you still feel that something was off. You know that the work was solid, and yet you're still being told that you're not strategic enough. If that resonates, let me know in the chat because that's happened to me so many times. Shipped on time. Sandra said yes. Gilead said yes. Yes, during one-on-one calls, yes. I was once being told in front of everyone when I was saying goodbye because it was my last day uh, by my engineering manager that he said, "Oh, you're a nice person, but you're just not a very good PM." That was kind of in the first 2 years of my PM career. So it was very hard to hear at the moment, but then it was also a very, very important moment that caused me to really want to improve and get better because I never want to go through that ever again. And I certainly don't want anyone else to go through that too. So that feeling that you guys are talking about in the chat is what we're here to talk about today. What's happening is that execution gets your muscles warmed up as a PM, right? It helps you ship, whether on time or not, right? That's a different discussion, but then it helps you realize impact. But at more senior leadership levels, we need a different kind of muscle. And that is how to think more deeply. And that's very, very different from the execution muscle that we kind of grew up with. So at some point, we're going to shift away from can you ship it or what can you ship to thinking about what should we be building and should we be building this at all and why? Why now? Why not later? Why not 6 months ago? And why us? Why not our competitors, right? That's a different skill. And most of us were never really explicitly taught how to think that way. Next slide, please. Thank you. So let me show you what I mean. Here's how the same story can sound in two different ways. Version one, we saw retention dropping, and so we ran a bunch of experiments on the onboarding flow and then iterated 3 times and got to 40% improvement. Now let's take a look at version two. We had this assumption that was baked in that if users got into the product, they would find value on their own. But then eventually we found out that the data showed that this assumption wasn't true at all. And so we made a bet. Rather than optimizing for the funnel that we know we have built, we focus on adding more delight to prove the product was worth coming back to again and again. So what do you think is the difference between version one and version two? Put it in the chat and let me know. What do you think is the difference in V1 and V2? One feels reactive. V2 sounds more ownership, more intention. V2 tells the story. V2, due to delay aspect, the framing. Yes, so V1 and V2 are actually talking about the same story and it's talking about the same outcome. But notice that V1 is focusing on narrating the what. You sound like a narrator, right? So you're telling the story in a very chronological order and it sounds executional. And V2 sounds more intentional, more strategic because it's focusing on the why and not just the what you have done. But if you really observe the differences between V1 and V2, the real difference isn't really just the words, it's the thinking underneath. And the thinking is what's driving the words that you use organically. So, in order to sound more strategic, it actually has to first start with your thinking. Once you start thinking more strategically, you're going to sound more strategic. So, the thinking is it talks about the why behind the direction in which you made a choice more intentionally, not mechanically. And it's not just focusing on the choices you made for the features. And there's a visual that I really like that represents this really well. So the thinking underneath is what shapes your words. Without the thinking, the words will stay surface level and it's going to be a narration of what happened in chronological order. But when your thinking is strong, we could bring the strategic intent to the forefront and then talking about the choices in the direction and not just narrating what features we have built. Over to you, Rachel.
Awesome. And one thing I wanted to say that I find interesting in this story, Nancy, is on surface, you would think that V1 is better because it's full of numbers,
Mm.
but the numbers are the outcomes. But the outcomes may have been bad, and then you wouldn't be able to tell that story. So that's also the differentiation between luck and skill. When you're talking about V2, you're showing your skill. When you're talking about V1, the outcome might be luck. So I wanted to call that out because I think like the depth of thinking is what really excites me here and connects nicely. Okay, so section two, we're going to go through the four questions that I believe that run through everything. And I'm not going to tell you those questions right away. I'm going to start with a question to you in the chat, which is what do you think is the difference between strategy and tactics? I see silence in the room, or is my thing straight? Okay. Strategy is the war, tactics are the battle. I love that, Sandra. Tactics is execution of strategy, what we need to do now, what we should be doing. Awesome. So I think that tactics is what you do when there is something to do. It's reactive in nature, right? When you're thinking about strategy, strategy is what you do when nothing is forcing your hand, right? The board, if I'm thinking about chess, is quiet. There's no fire, right? This is like the direction that you set, what you believe to be true, what you believe needs to be true in order to be successful. So the question is, when there isn't an obvious problem, do you have a view on when you're or where you're going? Are you willing to do the next thing to react to, right? These are the two uh, distinctions here. A roadmap that is very reactive is tactics. A roadmap that is built around a deliberate thought process, that is, and the value that you're creating and the hypothesis that you're looking to validate, that strategy. And while this quote here is attributed to Kasparov, it's actually from Gerald Abrams, if anybody is a big chess nerd. Okay, so I want to start with a story that is practical, and I'm going to talk about dating marketplaces. One of my favorite things to do at Meta was working on Facebook dating. To this day, I think it was the funnest problem I had to solve in my career. And one of the things I found was that if you're thinking about dating as a marketplace and heterosexual dynamics, and I'm trying not to get myself canceled here, the attention of one side of the market is actually worth almost 11 times more than the other side of the market. Think about that. And I will leave you to guess what side that is. And I want you to think about for a second, if I'm Tinder, which is this is a strategy and which of it is tactics, right? Drop it in the chat. So you have speed dating mode where everybody gets equal attention for a fixed window, or you have monetizing the needs for visibility rather than trying to equalize attention across the marketplace. What do you think is a tactics, A or B? So, um, guys that are just writing B, is B the tactics? Okay. So I realized I phrased the question confusing. So Achin, I think you are right here. A is this A is the tactics, B is the strategy, right? So monetizing the need for visibility rather than equalizing it is actually the strategy here. And the reason for that is that it doesn't change if you add speed dating or not, right? The fundamental of interaction. But if you remove the ability to monetize on likes, Tinder wouldn't be what it is today. So I hope this answers why monetization in this case is the strategy. By the way, if you're going to open a speed dating business as a standalone product, then speed dating and equalizing attention is your strategy. So just think about it also in the context of what you're solving and how. So if I'm thinking, so as I was thinking about women's attention being the bottleneck for our North Star, which was conversations, like how do you help people start a meaningful relationship, right? You had the same problem. The attention of one side of the marketplace is much more valuable in driving outcomes. So I was doing a lot of research on that, and this is the clearest conclusion I came to when I was thinking about Tinder, Bumble, and Hinge, the most popular dating apps. By the way, Facebook dating would have been number two in terms of usage in the US. So Tinder, they monetize the scarcity of women's attention, and their success metrics is revenue and scale, right? And if you're thinking about their paying users, 95% of their paying users are men, which proves the point I was saying yesterday that one side's attention is worth that much more than the other. If you're thinking about Bumble, women are taking the first move. You're essentially protecting women's attention, and you're really focused on the quality of their experience. They message first, you have a 24 hours window, and there's verification that needs to take place. And if you're thinking about Hinge, you improving quality for everyone. And their success metric, as far as they say it, is actually getting people off the app. They're still making money though. They have very rich profiles. They limit how many likes you can say, and they have a compatibility algorithm. By the way, I would say probably everybody has compatibility algorithm. But it's also important to note the success metric itself is also a strategic choice. How you're going to think about your success is going to dictate how you're going to design your app and how you're going to make decisions on your roadmap. What does this mean strategically if you know that one side attention is worth that much more than the other side? You design for that side first. Their attention is scarce by definition, so it's something, it's either a problem to solve or a product to sell. That is a strategic choice that you're going to make. And safety isn't a feature. It's actually the strategic foundation. And because of this disparity, it can play in both ways. Women need to be safe, need to feel safe and be safe in order to trust the dating app. But also, it's really easy for then scammers to impersonate women in order to capitalize themselves on the attention. And all of these things are things that I had to deal with when I was working on dating. So I want to go through what are the questions, right? The 4 questions that we have, and I'll address in a second why they're harder and what they are, is really where are we now? Where do we want to go? What are the gaps and how do we close them? So if you're thinking about these 4 questions, each of these apps had the same observation of the gap, of the baseline, sorry, of women's attention is scarce, and you want to use that as a way that you can reach the outcomes, right? Where you want to go is you want to get to that. So that's what you're looking to monetize. What are the gaps? Safety, messages, all of these things that you're thinking about are how you close them. And the strategy that you pick ends up being how you close these gaps, right? So when you're thinking about these questions, where are we now? Where do we want to go? What are the gaps and how do we close them? The easy version, right, of where are we now is it just describes the current metrics, right? Where we want to go is just a list of feature to build. What are the gaps is just list all the problems that you have. And how you close them, sometimes you just jump to the solution, right? But the trap is you do not want to confuse activity with position. It's exactly what Nancy was saying beforehand, right? You want you don't want to describe outputs, you want to describe the outcome, right? And you want to be able to prioritize constraints, not just list problems, because how you handle your constraints is going to dictate your strategy. And you don't want to skip validating the gap. Validating the gap is essentially your hypothesis. So I'm just going to call out a few frameworks to close the gaps. It wouldn't be a strategy discussion and we wouldn't call these out. And I'm not going to go through them in detail, but just very quickly. Porter's five forces. I cannot put a framework without talking about Michael Porter's five forces. And this is really about entering a new market or understanding competition, right? Jobs to be done framework, right? That is really when you're, instead of listening to what your users tell you that they want, you think about what is it that the users that you have are hiring you to do, right? If you're building what people are asking for, but you're not actually moving the needle, that's going to be important. Theory of constraints is just what we spoke about now. Women's attention is your constraint. Cold start problem. Anybody who is working in marketplace dynamics or even in content evaluation in the world of AI, a model has a problem of cold start. How do you set that up? How do you ignite that flywheel? And then network effects map, which is really the foundation of social media and a lot of marketplace dynamics as well, right? And then aggregation theory is probably one of my favorites by Ben Thompson Stratechery, who talks a bit about how you think about your marginal cost being zero in order to maximize the output that you can generate. So I'm not going to go into these in detail, but theory of constraints is definitely what we were focused on right now when we're talking about dating. Really important that you want to keep reevaluating. Strategy isn't set once. You want to revisit it, and that doesn't mean that you're going to change it all of the time, like Kasparov said, but it means that you need to understand what needs to be true in order for you to be successful. So I highly recommend building an understand section to your roadmap. And I remember arguing about this when I was at Meta. People are asking, what is an understand roadmap? But it is actually something very frequently used in order to reevaluate and make sure that you're continuing learning and thinking ahead. Are you changing your course because your strategy is wrong or because your execution is hard or not working right? And it's a delicate balance, right? Rightly said, tactics respond to what you have and they're reactive, but strategy holds the direction and thinks about what needs to be true in order to change courses. Okay, Nancy, back to you.
Thank you, Rachel. I love what you said. Are we changing course because strategy is wrong or execution is hard? It's also interesting to note that if execution is hard and when execution is not perfect, then you have no way of validating your strategy. So I love that line and that positioning.
Awesome.
All right. Next slide, please. So I want you to take a look at the three items on this slide. Q1, improve onboarding, and then Q2, reduce churn. Q3, expand to a new user segment. And sorry, before, please.
Sorry, I'm trying to foresee what you need because beforehand I screwed up. Keep
Yeah, no,
going.
all good. So, folks in the room, tell me which company do you think we're referring to? Tell me in the chat. SaaS company. This is actually a trick question. I was trying to trick you because it could be any company. It could be Spotify, it could be Slack, yes, SaaS, it could be every company, it could be fintech, it could be your company. So now the next question is not a trick question. Is this a plan or is this a strategy? It's a plan, yes. So next slide, please. This visual tells you the what and the when, but it doesn't tell you anything about the direction that this company has chosen and why. There's no bet in it, and there is no point of view. The key unlock for me that helped me see strategy in a completely new way is really just saying that strategy is a bet. It has to be a bet. So, to summarize, next slide, please. A plan tells you what we are doing and when, and strategy tells you the direction that we chose, what we believe to be true, and what would have to happen for us to be wrong, right? So it's very specific. It's specific enough to be right and also specific enough to be wrong. It's a point of view, it's a bet, and it's an opinion with strong conviction. So I have a very rough formula that I you could use to start thinking about how to frame strategy and how to kind of spot strategy in the wild. It might sound something like this. We believe in XYZ assumption, and so we're investing in XYZ area. And we'll know we're right when we see some signals. And if we see this other signal instead, we will change course. So you hear this framing all the time in financial reports and quarterly earnings reports. So that would be a very good place to start if you want to spot strategy in the wild. And over time, you will recognize this pattern, and then you'll be able to apply it on your day to day. So next slide, we have an example of how this could sound. We believe that enterprises are losing trust in AI tools because outputs are unpredictable and there's a lot of motion, but not enough progress and not enough outcome. So we're betting on explainability as our differentiator based on XYZ customer insights. And we'll know that we're right when procurement teams start asking for it in the RFPs. And if we're wrong, we would see it in sales and usage patterns. Okay, so this is what strategy can sound like. It is a bet, right? It's not neutral and it's not always right. It could be very wrong too. Next slide, please. Now let's talk about how strategy shows up in interviews, especially if you're targeting L7 and L9. So strategy, since it is a bet, it means that you had made a decision beforehand. And so whenever they're asking you about a decision that you made, that's really talking about strategy. They're not asking for what you did because they already know that you can execute. That's table stakes. What you really want to illustrate and communicate is that you understand the trade-offs that you're making. It's the choice, a deliberate choice that you're making. And do you know what had to be true in order for your bet to work? So now let's take a look at some examples. Um, Here's how in version one, the slide before. There
Sorry.
we go. All good. So here's how many candidates talk about a decision. It sounds something like this. We decided to prioritize X to attract users with Y goals, and then that resulted in Z impact numbers. Now, this framing gives you a position. Yes, it does. Not necessarily a decision because a decision shows the thinking that got you there. This does not show any thinking. So now let's take a look at version two. Version two sounds something like this. We had two options on the table. Option one is we're going to do X and get more users in the door and bet that once they're in the door and experience a product that they'll stay. This will only work if the barrier to entry is purely due to X problem and the product itself is good enough to retain them once that they're in. That's option one. And then option two is we're going to do Y because X won't matter if the product isn't meeting user needs yet. And so in that case, if we were to do that, you're just acquiring users who will churn anyway. Now, these two versions are referring to the same exact situation, but one of them shows that you understand the bet. The other one just shows that you know what the decision was, but not the thinking behind it. And that's different. That's the bar for communicating and showing strategic thinking, and not just to hear about your conclusion, but more importantly, the reasoning that got you there. Because at L7 and above, your job is to make good bets under uncertainty when things are super ambiguous. And the way you prove that you could do that in an interview is by showing how you think. Now let's go through another example. That same line of thinking, it's mapping out the conditions in order for your bet to be true, applies across the board and applies to probably the biggest strategy question you'll ever get asked, which is how would you grow this product? And this shows up in interviews and also in the role. Let's take a look at some examples. Most PMs would focus on 2x thinking, which is to make the product better and faster and bigger. We're going to close the gaps. We're going to beat our immediate competitors, and these are the obvious competitors. The thing to note is that 2x is not wrong, it's just incomplete. And let's take growing Netflix as an example. A 2x answer would sound something like this. We're going to improve the core recommendations experience because that is the core of what we do at Netflix. We're going to reduce the friction. We're going to launch new formats. This is why they launched gaming and podcasting. We're going to drive watch time, and we're going to make better content, and we're going to compete with Disney Plus and HBO. That's 2x thinking. A 10x answer sounds more like this. Next slide, please. There we go. The real competitor is not HBO and it's not Disney Plus. The real competitor is people's time. So when you have free time, your time goes to TikTok, to sleeping, to going out with friends, to reading, to working, etc. So you're not just trying to make it better for users to watch shows. You're really asking how to become a habit whenever people have time. And so to 10x something, we have to think, we have to be the thing that people reach for without thinking, both digitally and in the physical life, because that's how people are spending time. And this is an example of 10x thinking, and you can't find it until you follow the user's time, in this case being the biggest competitor, and not just the product usage. So 2x thinking is about being better, building a better product, and 10x is about being different, and that's why it is a bet. Now let's take this same line of thinking into meeting rooms. Also, sometimes in interviews as well, we have to communicate decisions all the time, and most of us tell the stories in a very operational way without even realizing it. Let's go through some of the examples. A operational framing sounds more like this, and you start to see a pattern, right? It's a narration is the operational framing. We saw low adoption, we ran experiments, we improved the flow, and then we improved conversion, right? This is telling the story in a chronological order. You're being a narrator. That's what makes it sound operational. A strategic framing would sound something like this. We had assumed that free access would drive usage, but it really didn't. And so we were optimizing for the wrong thing. It wasn't freemium that was going to move the needle. Once we flip the sequence, we're going to prove the value first, and then we're going to monetize. And then the numbers went up. And so the failure wasn't that we launched freemium. The failure was the assumption that we had made, thinking that the product was delightful enough. Okay, so this is an example of a strategic framing of the same decision, talking about the same decision that we made. What's the difference, you think? The strategic version it doesn't just talk about the outcome. It mainly talks about the bet and the assumption beneath the bet. And it even names the ego that prevented the assumption from being questioned in the first place, right? The ego that it's referring to is we thought our product was delightful enough until we realized that it wasn't. And so when you're able to call out the assumptions and the ego behind it out loud in a very clear way without any defensiveness, you're projecting confidence and leadership. And now you sound like someone who can be trusted to make the next bet more clearly. So to summarize, communicating strategy involves a high degree of awareness of the thinking behind the decision that you made, calling out the different options, why you decided to bet on something, and then how that bet was going to shape direction. That's what strategy sounds like. Now over to you, Rachel.
Okay, so we reached the elephant in the room of where AI fits and where it doesn't. So here are the things that AI changes, and here are the things that AI doesn't. AI really expedites your execution. It allows you to drive a lot more output. It shows you can iterate faster, which means that you can confuse your users faster. And you have access to technical capabilities. Your bottleneck is no longer execution. But it doesn't change the fact that you need to be asking the right questions or placing the right bets to solve the right problem. And if your success metric reflects your strategy, then you're in a good place. But if not, you're just going to keep iterating and driving blind. And it's really about having sequenced and deliberate bets of what we know is true, what needs to be true to continue, what needs to be wrong to change course. So there's a novelty trap here. AI makes it tempting to ship faster, but if we ship faster in the wrong direction, we might go full steam ahead towards a wall. So the risk of speed without strategy is you accumulate technical and product debt at AI speed, and you optimize for the wrong thing faster. You confuse velocity for progress. This is exactly what Nancy said beforehand. We shipped on things on time, but we're still not seeing the outcomes that we want, right? We're still not being strategic. And what ends up happening is strategy is whatever you build, strategy is a default. It's not your design, right? And the teams that are winning with AI are not necessarily the ones that are moving the fastest. They're the ones that who are clearest about what they're doing. And I think there's another new type of debt that we're going into with AI that is being discussed is the idea of knowledge debt, where AI takes a lot of the decisions and optimizes them for you, and you don't have the context or the thinking of why. And then what happens over time is you make decisions without realizing that you made them, and you're seeing things change and you don't understand where it's coming from. So I want to talk a bit about like similar to like different, same problem and three different bets, right? So I want to talk about how we code using AI for all of us vibe coders or agentic coders out there. I'm giving the example of GitHub Copilot, Cursor, and Claude Code. And there is a similar problem. How do you get developers to use AI, right? And there are three strategic bets that we can see that these three companies are taking, right? GitHub makes AI as a feature within the existing workflows. It says, let's meet people where they are and just allow them to continue coding as they would, right? You have Cursor that is saying, okay, we're just going to rebuild your development environment around it, right? And then Claude Code tells you AI is your colleague. You're building a team of agents that are delegating your tasks to. And so your gaps are for Copilot, there's a bit of that awareness. And are you really using it for the full potential, right? So on Cursor, the gap is the switching costs, right? And on Claude Cloud, it's the developer trust and autonomy, right? So these would come with different success metrics as well, right? Like the breadth of adoption for Copilot, how many times do you allow it to continue? Cursor, are people actually switching? How many of them are using your new developer environment? And then Cloud Code, tasks completed without intervention could be a way that you measure success here. So here you think about AI as a feature versus AI as an environment versus AI as a colleague. These are the three different bets that you see here. And when everybody is building AI features, what does 10x thinking actually look like? To Nancy's point earlier, you can think about, making the model better, cheaper, faster, or you can question whether the model is the game at all. So I'm a bit curious, which do you think is 2x and which do you think is 10x? Awesome. I see that people are getting a grasp of this. Very good. And so if I'm thinking about the strategic choice, you can think about, and I'm going to put here two strategic choices that you can make when you're thinking about AI models, is you can think about depth versus geography, right? Your depth of the model and the capabilities of it versus geographic expansion. And this is actually really important for AI models. Why? Because the language where you have the most examples for is English. The second one is Chinese, right? But if you're trying to capture as much market first, right, then you might want to not wait for the model to have perfect coverage. You build the relationship before the model is perfect and you expand geographically first, or you want to improve the model quality and go deeper on it before you're expanding to it. Open versus closed is another thing, right? If you're thinking about a closed model, so I'm thinking about open source versus proprietary. If you are in a closed model, you're protecting it and you're monetizing the access and the enterprise trust. But if you're thinking about open source, that really expedites innovation. You give it away, you win distribution, and you almost force the industry to reprice, right? And I think in this context, the 2x answer is always going to look more defensible. And the 10x is a strategic choice and not always an obvious one. Awesome. So what does this mean for PMs, in my opinion? When everybody can execute quicker, what ends up being your differentiator and being able to expand your scope, being able to expand your roles, being able to influence your teams in the right direction, strategic judgment is the key. AI fluency is a tactic, but judgment, knowing when to apply it, what are the concerns, is going to be your strategy and how to preserve that knowledge gap and close it, as we spoke. Sorry, knowledge gap. And then, in my opinion, the PMs who are going to stand out are not the ones that are using the most tools. They're going to be the ones that are asking the better questions of how and where to point these tools. So, Nancy, what are we going to do starting Monday? So, for your current role, I want you to think about your roadmap. And I want you to ask the four questions. Where are you now? Where do we want to go? What are the gaps? How do we close them? Find what you can't answer. That is probably going to go into that understand roadmap that I talked about. That is your strategy gap. That's where to start. Nancy.
Yes. And then I was like, yes, I'm catching your ball. And then after that, you're gonna pick a strategic decision from your career, and then you're going to reframe it using what we talked about today. Uh, just observe that your first version is probably going to sound close to one of our V1 examples. And then you're going to try to see if you could go closer to version 2. You're going to practice saying out loud as well. And what's very important is really just focusing on the bet that you have made and being very aware of what that bet even what that bet is, right? It's not just what you did, but what is it that you're betting on? What are the conditions that need to be true to support that bet? And then, of course, the why behind it.
Awesome. So we both want to thank you. We're going to do Q&A soon. So on the left-hand side, you can use this QR code to access my media with lots of video, including my version of growing Netflix 5x in 3 years. On the right-hand side, you have Nancy's QR code. She hosts a roundtable on the last Monday of every month. So
It's
if I'm
coming up.
calculating, is it this Monday or next Monday? I think it's next Monday, the
I
30th.
Yes, yes, not this coming Monday, but
And
the
then
yeah.
the following Monday. So
Hmm.
Monday the 30th, if I'm right about my dates. And then I am going to launch my Maven course April 23rd to 30th. So if that's something that's interesting to you, you will hear more about it because I tend to send emails about these things, like you probably saw for this session. And now we're going to move to Q&A. For Q&A, I'm going to stop the recording Um, Awesome. So it's easier for people to ask questions. And I'm also leaving the QR codes on in case you